If someone tells you they need to get a life, tell them to join us here at Road Gang Radio with Lindsay, Lawler, and Jimmy Mack. Let's seize the day with Phone Master Dre.
Oh, seize that day. Seize it all day, every day. This is Road Gang Radio live from Fast Sports Studios with your host, Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler.
I like you said, with your host.
Girl, my mom to this day, it's with, not which.
I mean, it is with, but it's part of your character, so it's all right.
Exactly. She's taking it from Turmoil with my dad. It's all good.
Yeah, I mean, and don't forget, we live in a city that has a song that it's one of its theme songs called Do What You Wanna. You know, I mean...
Thank you.
Do what you wanna. Ba-da-da-da-da. We do what we want to hear. By the way, that's a funny human being.
He's funny, right?
He's a funny human being, by the way.
I've got him tied up in the driveway right now. Everything's fine, guys.
Little chloroform, little form.
Like, what is happening?
Little form, the chloroform.
Just a little.
That is the thing I didn't think about. You know, if you're Nashville local and coming over here, or Franklin, like my guest today on We Should Write, coming up in an hour and a half, live at noon, will be Autumn McIntyre. She lives in Franklin, so she's not going to be weirded out when she turns down the street and sees horses.
Right.
But Dustin lives in San Diego. He's here traveling. He turns down the street and sees horses, and he's like, "What? This isn't like what is happening? This is not real. This is not professional."
Yeah, I'm a former sheriff, so when I drive down the street and I see deer on the road in the middle of the night, I don't go, "Oh my God, where am I?" I just kind of go, "Yeah, all right, sticks."
Yeah, you've been everywhere, man.
You know, I like the sticks. I love the sticks. I love being a part.
Everywhere,
I have, man. I have. But I can totally see him. You know, I mean, coming from San Diego and being like, exactly where have I ended up? What is this place?
Although I've never heard about you on a horse, and I heard you say earlier this morning, every time I get further away from being on a horse.
Oh,
and
man, I
was
used to
like,
ride every. I mean, I rode for, better part of a decade and a half. Man, my Aunt Mary Lou and my Uncle Joe owned a horse farm in Lumberton, Mississippi.
I did not know that about you. I learned something about you this morning.
And it's really fun because I remember the first time. It's like when I went shooting with the Joshua Chamberlain Society, and like Donna was like, "When did you learn to do that?" And the same thing happened to my friend Jerry a couple of about 2 years ago, I guess. I just got up and there was a saddle, and I got into the horse, swung my leg over, and he's like, "Wait a minute, how did you just jump up into that horse?" I'm like, "I've done this before. I know the way home." You know, you just riding a horse really is riding a horse and shooting a gun. Yeah.
Riding a horse is like riding a horse.
I mean, riding a horse is like riding a horse. And once you do it, you never forget. The only thing you have to remind yourself of when you don't do it for a while is how you feel the next day if you haven't done it for a while. You know.
Yeah. It's a little tight between the britches, if you know what I mean.
Hey, Phone Master Drake, can you do me a favor? Lindsay's having a little bit of a time hearing me in her headphones. So if you can crank me up, that'd be an awesome thing.
Hey, we've got a really cool guest, Jim, that I would love for you to introduce. So we were supposed to have this wonderful human, Jeremy, on last week, and New Orleans went down. I'll just put it that way. New Orleans went down. The tech in New Orleans went down. Too much partying going on, and it knocked the whole system down. So we got him rescheduled, and at no fault of his own, or our own, quite frankly.
The 7th Ward is undergoing maintenance. That was what they told me. The 7th Ward is undergoing maintenance. What, the 7th Ward is literally the center of most tourism in the city of New Orleans.
Well, listen, even centers have to sleep sometimes. Even if you're hiking the football, you got to take a little rest sometimes. So we got Jeremy back. He's here today. He's so graciously rescheduled. And I am so excited because this guy, as I mentioned to you, Jim, before we had him on last week, I said, you know, this guy feels like one of the smartest human beings, but also one of the most down-to-earth that isn't going to make me feel like a dum-dum. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much because it's #balance, right?
Oh, I'm telling you, he's one of the smartest human beings who's also a human being.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jesus.
All right.
Bring it.
Let me kind of tell you about this dude. When he's not writing about aliens, and by the way, you should read his book about aliens. I mean, it is funny, charming, and actually is for kids of all ages. J.A. Dauber can be found talking to students about books, movies, and other fun stuff at Columbia University in New York City, where he is a professor. He lives right near there with his family so that he can walk to work and see if anyone has dropped anything, like a phone. If you read the book, you'll get the gag. After all, you never know. He also wrote a YA novel about a teenage supervillain named Mayhem, which won an award from the Children's Book Council. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome Jeremy Dauber to the show. And this book is marvelous. Jeremy, tell everybody the title, first of all, because I want to kind of unpack it. Well, I'll tell them. Press 1 for Invasion. but explain why it's called Press 1 for Invasion, and good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me back and having, after last week. It's really just so great to be here. I really had such fun writing this book. As you say, for kids of all ages, it's a really nice way of putting it. And it's a book, a friendly, happy book about an extraterrestrial invasion of people who want to factory farm humans and eat them, basically. So, it's fun for the
That
whole
old
family.
chestnut.
Yeah, exactly. And I have kids of my own, and, they're all interested in phones and things like that. And I said, I had this image of a 10-year-old who wanted a phone, right, like a lot of 10-year-olds, and found it on the street, and looked through the camera on the phone, and he saw his crossing guard, but instead of like a head coming out of the crossing guard uniform, there was this goggle-eyed alien monster kind of head. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me write the book to figure out what's going on there. And I did, and now it's out.
And you did, and now it's out. But for me, what stood out, I have a almost 7-year-old. And I think, Jeremy, a lot about, so I also, full disclosure on the show, talk a lot about my love-hate relationship with Freddy Krueger, because I saw Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, very specific, at young, probably too young, one might say, age. My parents didn't let me. I think I found it accidentally or whatever. And I have this image of Freddy Krueger holding the babysitter's head in his hand, like at the kid's bedroom. I can't get it out of my head. But I bring that up because Freddy still shows up in my dreams today, and I'm always like, hey, Freddy, you don't have to be a bad guy. You could be good. Like, I'm always trying to bring him to the light. But I bring that up because you work with, you're a professor, you work with all ages, and you have kids, and now you've written this book, and you work with from kids to adults. So is there a line from your professor brain? Is there, like, what is it? When is the day that we're like, okay, it's okay to introduce this now. Okay, it's okay to introduce this now. It's not like one day we wake up and everything's okay. So what is that toeing the line of, now we can talk about aliens, now we can introduce horror, now we can introduce a bigger intergalactic thing? How do you navigate that?
That is the great question. And, it's a question that really, I had so many years of experience teaching as a professor before I had kids, but it's really a question that I answer and I think about as a parent first and foremost,
Yeah.
And I think really it is an individual question for families, for parents, for caregivers, that they know their kids better than anybody. And each kid is different. I, like you, had this kind of primal trauma of, in my case, it was Halloween 2, but watching something I wasn't supposed to watch. And if my parents had seen me do it, they would have been like, you know what, this is just you're not ready for this. And they would have been right. But of course I snuck down the hall because the people who we were visiting at HBO, and that was the problem. But, they were very happy to let me read a wide variety of things. Because they felt that I could handle it, and I think they were pretty right about that. So I really do think it is something sort of between sort of individual families to kind of make those judgments, see how their kids are growing. That said, I think this book is pretty family friendly for what it's worth. But and the little kids who have read it, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, seem to say like it's an appropriate kind of scare. But your mileage may vary. Everyone's mileage may vary.
Well,
Gotcha.
There's a certain level of, and this is something, by the way, Jeremy's also written a marvelous book of the history of American horror. From a standpoint, this is where it gets crazy, Jeremy, is the fact that, like I said, Lindsay talked about the idea of when is it an acceptable time to start introducing kids to this kind of stuff. But the other question is, how do you keep it straight? Because this book is written beautifully. It is written for the age that it claims to be written for. It is clean, accessible, clever, without being, there are some books that are written for kids that are actually written for adults. This book is actually written for kids while being able to be enjoyed by adults. That's a very different thing, as you know. Do you ever catch yourself when you're working going like, do not drift into academic mode, do not drift into academic mode, don't drift into high literary mode, stay with the kids, stay with the 8 to 11-year-old you're actually talking to, keep the story at their level without dumbing it down, and at the same time without dumbing it down? How do you do it?
Well, first of all, Jimmy, thank you so much for those really kind words. And you really, put your finger on it, which was, this in some ways was the hardest challenge for me, not so much to not write academically, but sometimes you're writing and you find, a beautiful word that we might use, regularly in our writing, or we find, a word like, the word that's coming to mind is discomfited, right? And, that might be the perfect word to describe the particular sensation. But you say, that's not a word that a 10-year-old, and this is written from the perspective of a 10-year-old kid, he would never use that word, right? So you have to find different ways of talking in that kind of way that and that was the biggest challenge for me, actually, was to kind of, make it smooth in that sort of way. And I do want to get back, you've articulated really well, also something to get back to something that Lindsay was saying, that, kids are full of fear, right? They're very afraid, and you understand why. They're afraid of everything. They don't know the world. They can't survive on their own in the world. They rely on these big people who love them usually, but who knows what's going to happen to them. And so, one of the things that fairy tales have done, that our stories always do, is provide them with a chance to kind of take those fears for a walk, in a kind of controlled environment, and then sort of at the end say, well, this is a story, it ends well, things are okay. And you can put the book down and go somewhere, go to sleep. And I'm reading the book now to my 7-year-old daughter at bedtime. And she, with the cliffhangers that are in the book, she sort of says, "Is it going to be all right?" And I'm like, "It's going to be all right." And then that's all she needs, and that's what she needs. And that there's something very valuable about that introduction to fear in a kind of comforting way.
I think that's great because, I'm going to read this book to my daughter, who's also almost 7, so let's have a play date. But I think that, I'm curious your take on if kids actually handle fear better than adults. This is way more than the book, but maybe why this book is also a great introduction, because you can do that. You can say to a child, "Oh no, it's fine." My daughter will say, "Is this real or it's fake?" I'm like, "Oh, it's fake. It's fine." She'll be like, "Okay, cool." Like you just said, you can't say that to an adult. As adults, children haven't been taught to suppress fear yet. And do you think that's maybe a reason? Because I can tell an adult, I can tell all my neurotic friends, self-included, I'm like, everything's okay. And they'll be like, "No, it's not. You're wrong." And so is that why maybe kids can feel better because they haven't been taught to suppress fear yet?
Yeah, and I think that, certainly it sounds like in your case, Lindsay, and I'm sure, that they have someone who they trust so powerfully and implicitly to tell them that it's okay. But also who is honest with them about the fact that there are things to be afraid of, which they know. And as you say, they're not taught to suppress, and that's very honest about that. I think that, in the book, they understand, the aliens from have always been a kind of metaphor for things that are beyond your control. Right. And there's a way in which by them asking and then being able to ask and them getting an answer from you and taking that answer, they're able in their own small ways, I think, to kind of exercise some control, even if it's over only their own emotions. And I think that's a really powerful thing for them.
The other balancing act, along with not using words that might actually not kind of fit the rhythm of the way kids think and act and play. The other thing is Lindsay talked about being traumatized. You did as well. Halloween 2, Nightmare on Elm Street. For me, it was my dad taking me to go see Alien when it opened. Wow. I'm telling you.
How old were you?
9.
Wow. Okay.
All right. I'm not trying to question your dad's parenting skill, but maybe.
No, and I insisted on going because my older brother was getting to go because he was 11, and I insisted on it. And therein lies the party. Me getting to be in despondent despair when Tom Skerritt got killed. What I'm kind of getting at here.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, too bad. But
it's too late.
But my question for you is: so along with the balancing act of writing to their not their level, but to a way that's most accessible to them. The other flip side of it too is like they're scary, and then they're scary because the comp I thought about, I started laughing because at one point I started imagining your central character as looking like a mini version of Roddy Piper because I kept saying, "Oh my God, it's like a kid version of They Live." Except the glasses only work for him, and that's the other thing is, okay, you can't talk about people getting their faces eaten off. So what can you do here to make sure that it's good and scary without crossing the line?
Yeah, and that was you're really putting your finger on it. That was a very important and complicated question for me to think about. It's like there's graphic aspect that you're talking about, the alien, right, is, the chest bursting, right, and the faces torn off or something like that. You don't really want to have any of that kind of gore kind of thing, right? And, you want to almost have it of the level of 10-year-old grossness, right? So there are points where, it's like I'm talking to my 7-year-old and saying, there's a point in the book where they're like, well, maybe we have to just cut off one of your ears and serve it to one of the aliens, right? And, you're like, you say to your 7-year-old daughter, what do you think? Should we take one of your ears? And they're like, oh, that's gross, but it's also silly and it's kind of fun, and there's that level of cartoonishness that I think is capable. But at the same time, the book, I hope, sort of articulates that these are real stakes. This is not a kid who has superpowers or anything like that. He's a normal kid that is sort of thrust into this situation that's a little bit that's much too big and sort of out of his control and scary, and he's just trying his best to get through it, and sometimes he makes some mistakes, and that's sort of what we all are, but especially little people.
Well, with, like, say, American Scary, you've written about the history of horror and American Scary, which I just started diving into, by the way, and encourage everybody to read that as well. Because Jim's always trying to school me on horror. It's never been my thing. I'm coming around to it because it's his thing. I don't think it'll ever fully be my thing, but I'm open to the story. As a songwriter, I love the storytelling aspect of it. So I'm curious. You obviously know the genre deeply. So I'm curious what the best horror stories, whether it's adults or kids, what they have in common.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what the best horror stories do is that they take something deeply universal and they clothe it in the resonantly specific, for lack of a better phrase. Is that we all understand the way that, as you know, because you're reading, and Jimmy, you've read this nonfiction book that I wrote, is that they take, there are these broad kind of categories of horror, big things out there, and the person right next door, and we can all kind of understand that those things are very terrifying, right? There's something that's totally beyond our control, and too big for us almost to get a hand on, like big aliens, right? Or there's something like that the person next door might be not who you think they are, or even, God forbid, right, the person in your house. Right, and that's really terrifying, right? And in some ways, in Press One, I tried to combine them both, right? The crossing guard is not who you think, it is, right? It's somebody terrifying, right? But that kind of thing of saying, well, here are these big sort of abstract fears that we all have, clothed in something that really feels right in your bailiwick. That's something that I think characterizes all the best works of horror that I can think of.
The other thing that is lovely about the book, and it's weird to use the term lovely in a book called Press One for Invasion.
Irony at its finest.
I'll take it.
But one of the things that's really lovely is there are value lessons for children inside of it too. The great and practical. I don't mean this sort of like soaring sort of, existentialist theory on the meaning of life, but literally be nice to the people who work behind the cafeteria counters. There's a lovely passage in it that actually is plot driven, that sets up something that ends up saving him. Be decent to the people who actually, do most of the cooking and cleaning around your school, because that may pay off for you, but do it because you're a good person. And so that's the other kind of balancing act in a book like this, is that you want to give people a book that has values. It doesn't mean those values have to be a specific ideology or anything like that, but you want to make sure that kids understand that good behavior, genuinely good behavior, as opposed to just following the rules, which sometimes is a really bad idea, is something that kids should strive towards. And the idea of being nice to everyone, to not putting anybody in a pigeonhole, is one of the themes in this book, right?
I'm really glad you said that, because that to me is, in this case literally, but I think in our case literally too, it's world saving, right? I mean, if you really are able to articulate, we're able to raise our kids with just treating everybody with decency and respect, I think that's a great world that I want to live in, and I want for my kids. And it's what we, I'm sure you guys do, is what we try and sort of instill, in our kids. On a day-to-day basis, and I'm glad that you feel that lesson gets through in the book, because as you say, it really is, if there's a takeaway, right? It's not what precise age should a kid get a phone or not get a phone, right? Or watch out to make sure your lunch lady is not an extraterrestrial, right? It's exactly what you're saying. So yes, absolutely.
From a the storytelling perspective, for you, because as I said at the top of the show, you come across to me, and now even more so after having talked to you, as this really balanced, like you're the kind of professor I might go back to school for, because I'm like, he's equal parts brains and human. But as someone who teaches college students and writes for middle graders and has a kid of your own, do you approach those audiences? I mean, I'm sure you do, but audiences differently, or is great storytelling, would you say, the same at any age?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. I think that one of the things that I try and push for both audiences, and certainly I do in my college courses, right, is that, to resist kind of very simple, I might use the word for the college students, monocausal, which I certainly wouldn't use in a middle grade setting. Right, but very simple explanations, and to do what, again, I wouldn't quite use this phrase for middle grade, but is what Jimmy was talking about, an ethos of charity towards texts, towards thinkers, towards earlier materials, towards earlier kind of situations. And it's very easy, I think, and I remember this from being 18 to 21 myself, to say, oh, well, I understand what's going on, and I'm going to be dismissive of X, Y, or Z, right? And my feeling is to try and instill in the students, like the same way we were saying, a sense of, well, let's take a step back, let's look at this, let's look at all of the different circumstances that might have gone into this. Let's just acknowledge how complicated, all of these things are. And then, there's an old phrase, I think it's from the Enlightenment, to understand all is to forgive all. And that's not a philosophy I subscribe to necessarily, but to understand all is a really important step in thinking about what it is that we choose to explain and explain away. So that kind of complexity, I think, really does work, and it's the kind of lessons that as parents we all teach. When someone says, my 7-year-old comes back and says to us at dinner, oh, person X, kid X was mean to me at the playground. We don't just say, well, that person is awful. We try and use it as a kind of opportunity to say, well, what was going on? What was the story? What happened? There's always more of a story, as I don't need to tell you guys, than that simple one thing. And that kind of thing really cuts across age lines.
One of the other things that I loved about the book is what I call the stirrings of, am I interested in a girl? The idea, am I interested in a boy? Not really understanding those feelings and not being actually chemically equipped to understand those feelings either. And one of the difficulties about putting people in that great middle swath, the adults of childhood, is the fact that you're having to simultaneously write kids who are very sophisticated adults while remembering that they're kids. And while kids have incredible depth, they don't have any understanding of what's there. And so they're unable to articulate it in that. And the idea that it's like, do you write, and this is a technical question, so you're writing plot-wise horizontally, but you're writing emotions vertically. Do you map that out, Jeremy? Do you say, like, okay, so I got to keep the plot going here, can't lose the thread, but I've got to actually give a little bit of the inner life of this human being? How do you outline a book like this, which I can imagine is probably different than something that is more kind of in lines of adult fiction?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great technical question, I was doing an event with a wonderful middle grade novel and a wonderful human being, a guy named James Ponte, who writes these novels called the Sherlock Society. Really wonderful writer, and he was describing that there are two kinds of writers. One who basically, he had a better phrasing for it, but one who outlines first. And then one who's like a pants writer who writes by the seat of their pants. And I apparently am more of the seat of a pants writer. I was just like, I'm going to sort of follow these people around in my mind movie and see what happens to them. And in some sense that provides, at least for me, a kind of freshness of, okay, what's happening next? How are they going to react to this? How are they, and so this relationship between, as you say, sort of this 10-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, who I guess it's fair to say, like you're saying, he kind of has a crush on, doesn't really know what that means or how to articulate it. That kind of developed sort of organically over the course of the story, and I just kind of tried to.
You noticed it. You noticed it.
I noticed it. Yeah. I mean, I kind of knew that, like, I was like, well, he wants a phone. Well, why does he want a phone? Well, he wants a phone also, there's a girl he kind of likes. And then it grew from there. I do think that writing, at least for me, writing for, a 10-year-old or writing about a 10-year-old is kind of like looking at your own past through a head cold. Like, you kind of remember, but you don't really. And all of our, and you were alluding to this earlier, Lindsay, all of our feelings are kind of more ossified and complicated and this is not a word, but neuroticized.
That is now.
It is now, right? Than the 10-year-old. But I do think that, there are some things that, at least for me, shine through sort of clear and bright. And I remember sort of having these feelings for, like, little 10-year-old girls when I was 10 years old, in my grade, and just being like, all I want to do is, like, hold their hand. That's what I want. And just trying to recapture some version of that. And it helps that I have a 10-year-old who, is just like, I'm not interested in any of this at this point at all. And I'm like, oh, just wait, things will change.
And it comes all of a sudden.
20.
And you're like going, I have no idea what this means. And it's literally the most confusing thing in the world. And it's captured really beautifully, by the way, guys, in this book. Press 1 for Invasion. It's available everywhere books are sold. Jeremy, really quickly, give people your socials, where they can find you and find out more about this book, because we got to shuffle off this radio coil.
I am Jeremy Dauber at X, at Twitter and Blue Sky, and I am. You can check out my website, jeremydauber.com, and Press 1 for Invasion. The book is available wherever books are sold.
Wherever you get your books, you can be invaded. You're being invaded by his book wherever you get your books. What, Jeremy? Before we lose you, what's the one book or movie that first made you fall in love with being scared?
I've got to say, like I said earlier, I did not really want to watch after Halloween 2, any of these horror movies. But there's a classic answer, but it's a classic for a reason. I was the right age for kind of the golden age of Stephen King, and I just read all of these books as a kid. Probably still a little too young, but just fell in love with them and remain so to this day.
If I never read The Trip Through the Holland Tunnel again from The Stand, it will be too soon. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Happy Halloween to you, my friend. Thank you for making the time in your busy schedule.
Hey, happy Halloween to you both for just an amazing conversation. Thank you guys so much.